Alright, so this video is going to walk you through quickly through some of the annotation steps that are absolutely necessary when you're reading the sources. This video is going to touch on a few certain points that you're going to get out of certain types of sources, and then the next two videos are going to touch on different aspects that you might get out of the other sources. So the first step in our reading process is to identify these three things. And we want to identify them because they're going to help us to understand what the text is going to be about even before we read it. So if we know the kind of person who's talking, whether an expert or an ordinary citizen, then we can predict what that text is going to talk about. If we know what type of text it is, whether it's an informational text or an argumentative one, then we're going to have an idea of the type of information or evidence that's going to be in that source. And same goes for the audience. So I'm going to show you two sources in these first two videos that are not sources that you see in your packet, but are sources that I sort of came up with as examples of how to read this stuff. So the first one is source Y. Now we're going to complete those first steps of identifying the persona, the text, and the audience. We want to spend a lot of time here. So we notice the author's name. This is our speaker. So in terms of persona, we have a speaker who is it looks like a journalist for the New York Times. It looks like he's written an editorial piece, which is like an opinion piece. And we see down here in the italics that it's excerpted from a national U.S. newspaper. So the persona, we could say, is either some sort of reporter or some sort of expert on, well, we don't know yet, we need to read the title. The title is going to tell us a lot about what this article is about. So you want to spend a lot of time here. The quotation marks indicate that this is an article, and so we want to read the full title that's within those quotation marks. And if we do, then we see that this source is about a report, a climate report, that describes a strong risk of early crisis. So clearly, on the side of government fostering green practices. And then also we know from this that the source has a negative view of climate change, sees it as a bad thing. So if we go over here to our persona, we have this expert reporter who knows about the negatives of climate change. Negatives of climate change. We have a text that's an opinion. And we have an audience that is also interested in the effects of climate change. And so we want to name all three of those things. Audience, type of text, persona. And now as we look into our actual text, and I know that it's short, not all the sources are going to be this short, but imagine that there were a little bit more here. Okay? We look at the text, we see that it's all about this landmark report from the United Nations on climate change that paints a dire picture of the immediate consequences of climate change. So our world is being destroyed, right? This report then, I can see as an example or as some sort of case study about climate change. I also want to understand this then, if it can get more detailed and specific, as credible evidence. So we keep reading. And it says, the report issued on Monday by the International Panel on Climate Change, a group of scientists. It's a group of scientists. Credibility there because scientists agree on it. Convened by the United Nations to guide world leaders, describes a world of worsening food shortages and wildfires and mass die-off coral reefs as soon as 2040. What I want to ask myself is this evidence credible or biased, and what type of evidence is it? Clearly, this is the same evidence as stated before, the example or the case study. And it's credible because it's an actual report, and also because a group of scientists have agreed on it and have come to the same conclusion. And that conclusion is the destruction that's being caused by climate change. And notice, we didn't need to understand every little detail of these paragraphs. We just need to understand the basic idea of what is our evidence about. And it's about the destruction of the earth because of climate change. And once I identify why that is credible, then I can begin to see how the evidence is going to fit into my argument. But the main things here are identifying the credibility of the evidence you're looking at and knowing beforehand what you're going to be looking at as you go in.